Today we need to talk about why kids should not receive any gender affirmation surgery. Spoiler, it can ruin their mental health. Hi, I'm a clinical psychologist, and on this channel we talk about everything related to, of course, psychology. So if you're interested, please keep on watching. Before starting this video, I want to remind you that I give in-person therapy. And if you're out of the city, I got you because I also give online therapy. So if you need a consultation, please feel free to reach me out on my social media, my phone number, my email. All of them will be listed down below on the description box as well. There are some topics that I always want to talk about, but I don't know how or where to start, like this one. With those, what I do is I write them down on my notebook so I don't forget about them. I do my research, and sometimes it seems like the inspiration really comes from heaven because coincidentally, something related to that theme happens in some part of the world. It makes waves on social media, starting debates, and those give me a lot of material to work so I can make my videos, which is what happened this time. So amidst the US presidential elections, Democrats were against Trump and bans because they offered to ban gender-affirming surgeries for children. They got elected, so now that's a reality. I got to know that thanks to the super serious news source Pubbase, which is a page with a demographic based on millennials but mostly Gen Zers. Hence why the number of people who were against this on the replies didn't surprise me that much. They were in summary tagging Trump as homophobic, dictator, fascist, anti-human rights, all of those things. But not only they opposed, some media outlets started to post articles and videos here on YouTube as well, all with titles similar to this one. Trump declares war on LGBTQ ban on gender-affirming, see penalty for dogs. Again, for wanting to ban gender transition surgeries on children, and also penalizing medical care institutions that do so. Adults are still going to be free to change their sex if they want to, but the goal is to let kids be kids. But because of how people, specifically woke people, are reacting to this news, I thought now it was the perfect time to tell you why this ban is actually saving kids, particularly in the psychological aspect, which is my work field. First of all, we need to go back to how children development works, starting from Piaget's theory, which is one of the standard theories still this day. So as you can see, from age 0 to 2 years old, the child begins to interact with the environment. From 2 to 6 or 7 years old, the child begins to represent the world symbolically. Then at 7 to 11 or 12 years old, the child learns rules such as conservation. And from 12 years old until adulthood, the adolescent can transcend the concrete situation and think about the future. And we also have Erikson's psychosocial human development, in which today we're going to focus until early adulthood because we're talking about the youth. So from 0 to 1, the kid develops trust or mistrust. Then from 1 to 3, they develop a sense of independence in many tasks, meaning like going to the bathroom, sleeping alone, washing their hands. Then from 3 to 6, they take initiative on some activities, may develop guilt when unsuccessful or boundaries overstepped. Then from 7 to 11, they develop self-confidence in abilities when competent or sense of inferiority when not. Then from 12 to 18, they experiment with and develop identity and roles. And from 19 to 29 years old, which is early adulthood, they establish intimacy and relationships with others. In both of these theories, as you can see, children don't really know who they are until they enter into adulthood. What does this have to do with a trans kid? A kid is not fully conscious of who they are in any area of their life. They have doubts about little things as how to dress, how to do their hair or makeup to fit in, about how to decorate their notebooks, about their own personality. How do you expect them to be 100% sure that they want to be trans? You cannot, because they are still discovering life. Now, whenever the should kids transition conversation comes in the way, there are certain groups of educated people that talk about this mental pathology called gender dysphoria to justify why children should cut their genitals at such a young age. But hey, I'm a psychologist, so I can refute these individuals with my knowledge and expertise. But let's satisfy these people that have studied enough to understand this mental illness. Okay, so here is the criteria for gender dysphoria that is found on the DSM-V. So as you can see here, it says, a marked incongruence between one's experience expressed gender and natal gender of at least 6 months in duration as manifested by at least 2 of the following. A marked incongruence between one's experienced expressed gender and primary and or secondary sex characteristics, a strong desire to be rid of one's primary and or secondary sex characteristics because of a marked incongruence with one's experienced expressed gender, a strong desire for the primary and or secondary sex characteristics of the other gender, a strong desire to be of the other gender, a strong desire to be treated as the other gender, a strong conviction that one has the typical feelings and reactions of the other gender. The condition is associated with a clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Specify if the condition exists with a disorder of sex development, or if the condition is post-transitional in that the individual has transitioned to full-time living in the desired gender and has undergone at least one sex-related medical procedure or treatment regimen. But here's the thing. The criteria is very subjective, and yes, there are many other mental illnesses that have very subjective criteria as well, but the huge difference is that for those other mental illnesses, we have psychometric tools that have been studied and proved to have a high validity percentage that allows us to determine if our patients suffer from those disorders. FYI, by contrasting the data provided by the client, maybe relatives or close people, and the tests. But for gender dysphoria, we do not have that help. So to conclude that they really have GD, we need to have an extended period of continuous therapy sessions. It may take years to do so, even when we are treating with adults. This should be enough to explain why you cannot say that a 3-year-old is transgender, but still some don't want to understand that. And something that makes me worry even more is that everyone that feels a little bit different than their peers can go to Google, do a quick research about the way they feel, and it tells them, oh, you may have gender dysphoria, you may be transgender. But even more shocking to me is the treatment Google recommends for gender dysphoria. Here you can see therapy can help people with gender dysphoria gain confidence in expressing their preferred gender. Treatments may also include small changes like going by a different name, medical therapies, and gender affirmation surgery. With so much access to the internet, a child sees this and they want to undergo a surgery, and adults can send this for being brainwashed by a woke ideology that obligates them to support anyone that wants to identify as LGBTQ+, but I have to repeat it. Children nor teens are fully developed to transition. But in my opinion, it's not enough for you. Here's a great article, which I'll link down below, titled Not Sterilize Children, Why Physiological Gender Transition Procedures for Minors Should Be Prohibited, which questions the weak criteria for gender dysphoria. There are a few noteworthy points to make about the gender dysphoria diagnosis. For one, it should be noted that the formulation of the GD diagnosis has been critiqued as an explication of a cultural phenomenon, most relevant to the United States, to garner insurance reimbursement for transgender medical treatments. The current diagnostic criteria itself was greatly debated for 5 years leading up to the release of the DSM-V, and for a good reason. In particular, the criteria comprising the GD diagnosis show a questionable departure from other considerations that are apparent in the DSM-V while diagnosing mental health issues for children. First, GD has been conceptualized as applicable to both children and adults. When diagnosing a child or an adult, the symptoms should be present for 6 months. Interestingly, the observation period is the same for both children and adults. This is suspect because it is well documented that the brain continues to develop into a person's mid-20s. Some of the greatest developmental strides are known to occur within complex neurological structures during adolescence, specifically the limbic system, also known as the seat of our emotions, relates to emotional processing, learning, and memory. This important structure plays a significant role into a person's mental health. Structures like the limbic system take the longest to reach structural norms. Many people do not reach these structural norms until they are in their 20s. Yes. First of all, every single mental pathology aside from GD has a different duration for children. How sketchy is it that this is the only one that has the same time lapse for both kids and adults, when we know that we have to take age into account because of their mental development? This maturation process is generally recognized and upheld in other DSM-V diagnoses that are thought to reflect a stable and observable pattern over time. For example, the DSM-V contains a cluster of disorders referred to as personality disorders. These disorders are characterized by an enduring pattern of thinking, feeling, and behaving that is relatively stable over time. When diagnosing a personality disorder, the criteria requires that the symptoms be present longer in children than what is required for adults. Here's the guidance offered in the DSM-V in regard to making a diagnosis for children. Here's an example. Personality disorder categories may be applied with children or adolescents in those relatively unusual instances in which the individual's particular maladaptive personality traits appear to be pervasive, persistent, and unlikely to be limited to a particular developmental stage or another mental disorder. For personality disorder to be diagnosed in an individual younger than 18 years, the features must have been present for at least 1 year, meaning that to be diagnosed with such serious pathologies, you've had to manifest its symptoms for at least 1 year, at least. But let's continue because this part supports what I told you before. In contrast, the criteria for GD in children includes an observation of 6 criteria for a 6-month duration. Further, the DSM-V tells us that the GD diagnosis requires that one of the 6 criteria must include a marked incongruence between one's experience, expressed gender, and assigned gender. The person should also experience the condition as associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in social, school, or other important areas of functioning. The remaining 5 criteria necessary for a GD diagnosis arguably give a lot of room for interpretation. And here the author leaves us with the criteria that I read before. By the standards set in the DSM-V, diagnosing personality disorders in children should be rare and observed for a lengthy period. Yet the interventions for treating personality disorders in children are not as physiologically invasive, nor do they involve the potential for altering or removing healthy organs. However, the interventions outlined throughout the remainder of this paper are potentially life-altering, and if diagnosed, are preceded by only a 6-month awareness of gender dysphoria symptoms. In this way, the gender dysphoria diagnosis in children is not made with the same caution as personality disorders, which are considered indicative of a stable psychological and behavioral pattern. In simpler words, it literally means that the diagnosis for GD has been basically made carelessly. It basically says if you haven't been fitting with the standards of your biological sex, well, you are trans, now you have to undergo surgery to actually transition, which is ridiculous. There have been plenty of girls that have been tomboys their entire childhood and teenage, maybe because they grew up surrounded by brothers, male cousins, male neighbors around their age, they had more chemistry with the male gender, or they just felt curious about more masculine stuff, but not because of that they were transgender. Then while becoming adults, they naturally develop their femininity, their love for makeup, dresses, maybe motherhood. What if on their childhood their parents made them undergo a gender-affirming surgery? They'd probably be suffering from severe depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, or maybe they wouldn't even be alive. Which, yes, gender dysphoric people already suffer from all of this, but if they receive medical hormonal treatment or surgeries, especially as kids, all of this can spike significantly, even more when they took that decision while not being mature enough. Or even worse, their parents decided they were trans, which is what happens nowadays with this woke ideology. But there is something else that I need to bring up: the actual persistence rates of gender dysphoria. Rates of persistence of gender dysphoria from childhood into adolescence or adulthood vary. In natal males, persistence has ranged from 2.2 to 30%. In natal females, persistence has ranged from 12 to 50%. Those persistence rates are the percentages that continue to have gender dysphoria. That means the number who grow out of their gender dysphoria, the persistence rates range from 70% to 97.8% in biological males and 50% to 88% in biological females. In a separate analysis combining the results from 10 studies, two scholars reported in 2016 that for the majority of the children, 85.2, meaning 270 out of 317, the gender dysphoric feelings remitted around or after puberty, meaning that only 14.8% continue to experience such feelings. This occurs, yes, because children are literally just exploring life, but also because they are developing. It is a very common experience that during puberty, teens wish to not be the sex they are because they usually feel uncomfortable about the biological changes their body is going through. It is common that some of them don't want to be hyper feminine or hyper masculine because in some occasions they are afraid of growing up and they still want to be kids, and sometimes they do not want to embrace their biological sex because they have a problematic relationship with a parent of the same sex, and by rejecting femininity or masculinity, they try to reject said parent as well, but none of those are motives that are good enough for a child to be transgender. If anything, therapy would be the most important thing to reach for when this stuff happens, because behind a young person that doesn't feel manly or feminine enough, there might be other issues that need to be addressed. Transitioning is not the solution. If anything, it would be another issue long term. No wonder why now we hear many stories about detransitioners in which they say they shouldn't have gone such dangerous processes at such a young age because they weren't wise enough to understand what they were signing up to. The issue today is that wokeism is invading every single space to gaslight everyone into getting into a cult, even when that puts children in danger. Even science seems to not be reliable these days. If you didn't know, there has been a $9.7 million study on puberty blockers on teens that has been hidden because they for sure know those damage children's mental health. But they don't publish it because it doesn't align with their woke agenda. Even the New York Times, which is more inclined to the left, made a piece about it. US study on puberty blockers goes unpublished because of politics, doctor says. The leader of the long-running study said that the drugs did not improve mental health in children with gender distress and that the finding might be weaponized by opponents of the care. Opponents of care meaning people with common sense. An influential doctor and advocate of adolescent gender treatments said she had not published a long-awaited study of puberty blocker drugs because of the charged American political environment. The Dr. Joanna Olson Kennedy began the study in 2015 as part of a broader multi-million-dollar federal project on transgender youth. She and colleagues recruited 95 children from across the country and gave them puberty blockers, which stave off the permanent physical changes like breasts or a deepening voice that could exacerbate their gender distress known as dysphoria. Dr. Olson Kennedy is one of the the country's most vocal advocates of adolescent gender treatments and has served as expert witness in many legal challenges to state bans. She said she was concerned the study's results could be used in court to argue that we shouldn't use blockers because it doesn't impact them, referring to transgender adolescents, meaning they increase problems for young people. Distress being one of them, but who knows which other mental, psychological difficulties they got from the study, because this doctor doesn't want to make it public as it goes against wokeness. And this is so nasty because the personal interests from this doctor go beyond the well-being of a larger population on young kids that have a long life to experiment. Dr. Hilary Cass, a pediatrician who this year published an extensive review of youth gender services in England, said that the delays from the American and British research groups had led the public to believe that puberty blockers improved mental health, even though scant evidence backed up that conclusion. It's really important we get results out there so we understand whether it's helpful or not and for whom, Dr. Cass said. Her report found weak evidence for puberty blockers and noted some risks, including lags in bone growth and fertility loss in some patients. It prompted the National Health Service in England to stop prescribing the drugs outside of a new clinical trial, following similar pullbacks in several other European countries. An NIH spokesman said that while the agency generally encourages the publication of data supported by its grants, researchers decide how and when to do so. Which is a joke for literally the rest of the world because they are not receiving the information they deserve to get about these medications that not only affect children mentally but physically. And as you can see, this study is very important for the world to see, as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Healthcare and Financial Services sent a letter demanding for the results to be published. Subcommittee on Health and Financial Services Chairwoman Lisa McClain is conducting oversight of the National Institutes of Health after the results of a $9.7 million taxpayer-funded research project studying the effects of puberty blockers for transgender youth has been hidden by the project's principal investigator. In a letter to National Institutes for Health, Director Monica Bertagnolli, Subcommittee Chairwoman McClain, requests documents and information related to the ongoing project and on public project data. The Committee on Oversight and Accountability is conducting oversight of the National Institutes of Health grant of $9.7 million to an ongoing research project titled The Impact of Early Medical Treatment in Transgender Youth, wrote McClain. We are alarmed that the project's principal investigator, Dr. Joanna Olson Kennedy, is withholding publication of the project's research findings, which cast doubt on the efficacy of the gender-affirming model because she believes the findings could be weaponized by critics of transgender medical interventions for children. Dr. Olson Kennedy's apparent mischaracterization of the TYC study's results and refusal to publish taxpayer-funded research because they contradict her pre-existing biases and could be cited by critics of the gender-affirming medical interventions is an irrefutable example of politicization of scientific research to further an ideological agenda. Deliberately mischaracterizing and withholding the results of the TYC study has serious implications for the health and safety of children who are subjected to gender-affirming medical procedures, many of which are irreversible and hold lifelong implications despite lacking adequate scientific support for their efficacy or safety, continued McClain. NIH is responsible for overseeing its extramural research projects to ensure supported researchers practice transparency, exemplify scientific integrity, and are proper stewards of taxpayers' funds. Therefore, in light of the NIH's grantees' unwillingness to release the research project's findings, we ask that you provide documents and information to assist the committee's oversight of this matter. She said what I wanted to say. This Olson Kennedy doctor has been an activist for children reaffirmation surgeries, so the bias is already there. Plus her words of this study can be weaponized Those are terms woke individuals always use to defend themselves, and they're supposed to be scientific, hiding the results. I think this is more incriminating than the actual conclusions made in that study. All that I can say to close this video is that kids are not able to determine if they are transgender or not. Kids see everything as something curious and fun because that's their nature, one full of innocence that doesn't have to be ripped away from them. They don't deserve that. Let kids be happy, naive, the explorers they are. Let teens develop and discover who they are and what they want to do before subjecting them to irreversible procedures that put their overall health at risk. Let them find their identity until they are grown, consenting adults that are usually mature enough to take important decisions as adults. Don't ruin a young life just because a woke agenda tells you to do so, because it will bring tons of consequences long-term, physically, psychologically, and spiritually, which are not really worth it. Is there something you learned from this video or that you would like to add to the conversation? Leave a comment down below. Also, don't forget to like and share with someone that may find this useful. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you never miss out for more interesting psychology content. Thanks for watching.